What happens when God comes? Do you recognize that question? If you do, it might have been from the first Christmas story that we presented a few weeks ago. Our narrator, Linda Campbell, who did an amazing job, but you know that if you saw it, that was a question that she repeated more than a few times. What happens when God comes? Because here we are in the new year, and Christmas is over, and the baby Jesus was born. They called him Emmanuel, meaning God with us, and then Jesus grew up to be a man. And what happened? Well, what happened is represented on the wreath behind me. Peace, joy, hope. And then the fourth one, what was the fourth one? Oh, love. Yes, love. What we want to look at today is something else that Jesus brings. It's not represented by a candle on the wreath, although I think it should be. Jesus brings something that brings to many of us a different reaction, a whole different reaction than peace, hope, love, and joy. And sometimes I wonder why it's not represented on the Advent wreath. We know that God coming into the world is a good thing. We know that that's good news. How do we know that? Well, many of us have experienced it in all kinds of different ways. We also know that the angel saying to the shepherds, I bring you good news of great joy. For unto you is born this day a Savior, and he is Christ the Lord. I know Christmas is over, but that's what we remember as being the good news. And like old Ebenezer Scrooge said, if you watch the Christmas Carol, I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it every day of the year, not just on Christmas Day. It's good news because through Christmas we know that God is real and that God is alive and that God cares for humankind so much to make an appearance in the world in a very real way that we can understand and that we can just get our hands on and sink our teeth into. We know that God, because God came as Jesus and Jesus suffered as we do, we know that God knows what we're going through even today. We know that God knows our name and has a plan for our life. This is all good news. And if we can take that message into our hearts and find a deep place for it, it will make a difference in our lives and it will bring us joy and hope and peace. And this is all part of the Christmas narrative. You know that. But in the middle of that narrative is this story about someone who hears about what Jesus brings. And this person has a whole different reaction. And I think this person's reaction should be represented on our Advent wreath. Here's the text from Matthew in chapter 2. This is the classic Epiphany text. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him." Well, we know that story. We sing about it. O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. That's part of the Christmas story, right? Star of wonder, star of light. Now here's the part. Listen. Here's the part we don't hear as much. This reaction to Jesus coming that this person has is a huge part of the Christmas story. When King Herod heard this, heard the good news, he was disturbed. And all Jerusalem with him? Wait, it's not just King Herod, it's all Jerusalem? What happens when God comes? That was the Christmas story question that Linda Campbell read. And then we lit the candles of hope and peace and love and joy. Because that's what happened when God comes. And now we have this whole different reaction. We have disturbed. Why aren't we lighting a candle that says disturbed or that represents disturbed? And then Herod called the Magi secretly. Whenever anyone in the Bible does anything secretly, it leads to no good. Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, and he said this to the Magi, "Go search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." Now, we don't know exactly how or exactly why, but we know the Magi somehow knew what Herod was up to. "Find the boy, Magi, because I want to worship him too." And they're like, "Yeah, right, Herod." They don't call us wise for nothing. They knew. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were just 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. This is what Madison and Haven just sang about. Herod the king in his raging all children young to slay. That's the reaction to Jesus coming into the world. And it is far away from hope and peace and joy. And what's the fourth one? Love. Yeah, that's the fourth one. I mean, it's one thing to not care about the news that Jesus is born. And we get that in our culture. We see it everywhere in our culture today in Canada. People just don't really care for whatever reason. There's a lot of different reasons, but if you want to worship this, if you want to put meaning to this Christian message, this real meaning, whatever, live and let live, but they don't really care about it. Not the case with Herod. Herod cared. He cared a lot. He was furious about it, and he was disturbed. Jesus brings hope, peace, joy, and love. Those are all the things on the wreath. My question for you today, how come anger and disturbance isn't on the wreath? Because that's a reaction. Now, we might think, oh, that's just Herod. Herod's some crazy king. And we can see why Herod was so threatened by Jesus, because people were calling him king of the Jews. And Herod's like, wait a second. I'm king of the Jews. We can see why Herod was threatened. And so we think, okay, but what does that have to do with me today in this brand new year of 2021? And I would say to you, a lot. Because you and me can easily, very easily, be in that same camp. We can be threatened by what Jesus brings. That's why I think that disturbance should be a candle on that wreath. Think about it. Think about the end of apartheid in South Africa in 1994. What a great day. Jesus came to bring justice, and Jesus came to bring equality. Those are things that Jesus brought, and those things happened in South Africa in 1994 when apartheid ended, and the black man was suddenly free. But what about the Afrikaners who lost so much of what they had? Their lives were just turned upside down. How would they have reacted to that news? Or what about the abolition of slavery in the United States 100 years before? The black man is now free. That's what Jesus came to bring, equality. It wasn't such good news for the plantation owners, so strike the candle of disturbance. What about the suggestion that the wealthiest 1% of Canadians who control 80% of Canada's wealth should be taxed in a whole different way? I mean, most of us are like, how could it possibly be that 1% control 80% of Canada's resources and money? How could that possibly be? So that's good news. Let's do that. What about the 1% who hear that news? How would they feel about that? You go ahead and light that candle of anger and disturbance. How do we bring justice to our Indigenous peoples? How do we do that? Jesus came to bring justice and equality. After 500 years of colonialism, how do we bring justice? Do we give their land back to them? That sounds like a good idea, and I'm sure they would react with hope, peace, and joy if that happened. But what about those of us who have houses built on their land? So go ahead and light that candle of disturbance. Because when Jesus comes in to bring justice and equality, people are disturbed. I read this great Canadian novel called Random Passage. It's a story about a family from 19th century England, uneducated and poor. The young husband just scrambled to try to find work, and he was convicted for stealing from his employer. He was just trying to feed his family. And the punishment for that conviction was either banishment from England or prison time. And so he decided that they would leave England and that they would sail to the New World. And he said to his young wife, "We're going to the New World. There's a place called Newfoundland. And we'll get free land, and there is fish like you have never seen before, and we'll be free. We can have a family. We can have all the things we wanted." And she said, but England's our home. This is a huge change. All our friends are here. I'm not sure if I want to make that change. That change disturbs me. What about if I were to say to you, we want to build some kind of church community where we could have 100 kids and young people here every week, not just for worship, but for all kinds of programming. If we could communicate to young families and their children that God is real and that God is not irrelevant and that God is not backward, and there could actually be some joy in being a person of a Christian faith. And many of us would say, yeah, I like that, kind of, but that sounds like a big change. I mean, young people are different. Kids are different. Kids are noisy and they're messy and they're hard on carpets. And young people just have a different culture and a different way of thinking. And they have tattoos. They have tattoos. Yeah, they have tattoos. A lot of them have tattoos. Well, what about our traditions that we've cherished here for decades? Go ahead. Light the candle of disturbance. Well, Herod sure was upset. Some people were pretty happy about the birth of Jesus. Behold, I bring you good news of great joy, and it will be for all people. But Herod's like, this revelation seriously messes up my station in life. And I like my station in life. And so, what happens when God comes to you? The whole Herod episode, it just sets the stage for what Jesus ultimately grows up into. Prince of Peace, yes. The giver of comfort and hope to people, yes. But also the disturber of peace. The person who challenged people who exploit the poor. The people who exploited the poor lived in peace, but that's not real peace. Like when Martin Luther King Jr. marched through Birmingham, and he was arrested for disturbing the peace. And he said to the officer, "Sir, there can be no peace when there is no equality." Jesus, the giver of hope, yes. The great healer, yes. What a friend we have in Jesus, yes. But also the challenger. The challenger that turns to us and said, if you want to be my follower, you need to pick up a cross. Because it is impossible to live the love of God without making sacrifices. And people just turned. What about the words, the opening of Jesus' famous sermon that I just read called the Sermon on the Mount? Blessed are you who? Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who are hungry now. Blessed are you who weep. And we hear that and we think that's good news because I've been poor. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to cry. I weep. Jesus is blessing me. I know what it's like to be hungry in stomach, but also hungry in heart. But then he launches into the woe to yous. Woe to you who are rich now. Woe to you who are laughing. Woe to you who are well fed. And that is threatening, I would think, to many of us. I'm well fed. I have never been hungry in my life. I have built a life for myself where I laugh all the time. And I have money. I have so much money, I don't know what to do with it all. I mean, at least compared to 95% of the world. Woe to you. These are among the very first words Jesus says in his ministry. And like the Herod story, they're the opening movement to a symphony that foreshadows the nature of the music that is to come. Light up that candle of disturbance. If you go through the Gospels, and particularly the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus consistently says, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." You have heard it said, "Love your neighbor." But I say to you, love your enemy. Love my enemy? You want me to hear that as good news? I can barely love my family the way I know you want me to. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, but I say turn the other cheek, Jesus said. You want me to turn the other cheek? You have heard it said, when a Roman soldier walks by, carry his pack. I say to you, carry his pack for twice as long as you have to. But how can you imagine, Jesus, that I would hear that as being good news? Light up that candle. You've heard it said, love your wife and your family and be good to them. I say to you, love your neighbor's children as much as you love your own, because it takes a village to raise a child. And we're like, Jesus, I'm disturbed because I don't know if I can do any of that. Add another candle to the wreath. And maybe this fifth candle that surrounds the Christ candle should be twice as big as the other four. Candle of disturbance. Several times in the Gospels, people walk away from Jesus. And what they say is, these teachings are too hard. You're bringing us values and priorities that are turning everything upside down. And then Jesus went to the cross, convicted for disturbing the peace. And he said to Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is not of social status or wealth or power. My kingdom is advocating for people who can't advocate for themselves. And now I'm going to go to the cross to prove that I love people the way I say I do. And people are like, that's not the kind of king we imagined from Jesus. And they all ran away. Light up the candle. So here's the point to all of this. And it's simple. It's simple. There's a bit of Herod in each of us. There is something that Jesus brings when we ask that question, what happens when God comes? There is something that Jesus brings when Jesus comes that threatens us, because it calls us out of our comfort zone, out of the comfortable places that we all live in. It calls us to question certain ways we live. It calls us to love everyone, not just the people we want to love, including our enemies. And there's so much of that we just don't like. And we're disturbed. Jesus said, go and do likewise. All of these things I teach you, all of these things I show you, I want you to go and do likewise. If you have never, ever done that in your life, gone to do likewise in what Jesus does. If you have never done that, or if it's been a long, long time since you've done it, there's still time. Let me tell you this. The Bible is full of healers and saints and apostles who used to be cheaters and procrastinators and old people who thought that there just wasn't enough time to make a change. There's still time. It's like Ebenezer Scrooge on Christmas Day. There's still time. What better way? What better way to start the new year? Well, Herod, the king of Judea, made a choice around how he would react to the coming of Jesus the Christ. He made that choice. And so will you, and so will I. What happens when God comes for you? I'm going to invite the band to come back up, and we're going to sing a song. As they're coming up, I'd just like to take an opportunity to thank the band.